second episode of New Hickory. If you recall, this site's dedicated to Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. And why? Because he was a president that was able to pay down the national debt to zero. He had to fight the banks for a lot of years, and even once he got it paid down, they fought him and got the national debt almost started right away again the next few years. But at least he did it. Well, if you recall last week, we talked about the debt ceiling and the Federal Reserve. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Federal Reserve, how it affects our economy and our nation, and then have a chance to talk about the fiasco in the theater that is the debt ceiling in Washington, D.C. these last few weeks. So what is a central bank? Why do we have a central bank? In Andrew Jackson's time, he was fighting the central bank of his time, the second bank of the United States, that was largely controlled by bankers from Europe. A central bank is a bank that has the privilege and the right to supply a government with all their currency, to literally print money, create money out of thin air, out of nothing, and loan it to a country at interest. As bankers spread across Europe and became more sophisticated throughout the Renaissance, they understood that there was almost no one better to loan money to than a government, because that government had taxation power on its own people to be able to pay those debts back. But now we're in a situation as a nation where we have an unbelievable amount of debt, and most American families do not have the ability to pay any further taxation. Our central bank in the United States is called the Federal Reserve. How do we get it? Well, we got it because we had a president, Woodrow Wilson, who signed it into law in 1913. A central bank is a bank that's allowed or has the privilege to loan money to a country at interest, but this money they create out of nothing. No one else in the nation has the power or the privilege to create money or to move currency. Our own Congress, our own president, our own government, in the system we live in this country, cannot produce currency. We can't control interest rates. We can't control the amount of money. So our Federal Reserve controls our complete currency system, our banking system, and it regulates the volume of money and the appreciation or depreciation of assets through controlling interest rates. It's a tremendous power. So our Federal Reserve controls such a great extent of our society: entertainment, literature, news. Have you ever noticed how, regardless of what news station you turn on, you get almost the same story? Well, here's a story for you. There's no such thing as a business cycle. We're constantly told the reason we lose our houses and lose our boats and lose our jobs is because it's part of the business cycle. Human beings' needs and wants do not change that dramatically. They don't change by 50%, by 80%. The amount of food you eat in 2007 and the amount of food you eat in 2008 is probably within 0.5% of the same amount. The Federal Reserve purposefully controls the money supply to cause inflation and deflation, to take assets from people. And they've created an academic environment and a business environment where the lie is sold to the American people that it's part of the business cycle. For example, in the Great Depression, in 1928, for every man, woman, and child in America, there was $26,000 in the economy. By 1934, by calling in loans and not reissuing new debt, the Fed had taken that number down from $26,000 per capita to $6,000. The Great Depression that we read about in our textbooks was largely staged by our central bank, the Federal Reserve. So now that we've talked about the business cycle, what is happening today in our country? After 9/11, the central banks and the Bush administration on purpose lowered the interest rates to animate people's minds and to stimulate the economy. If you recall, President Bush said, go to the mall, go out and spend. And the American people did. They bought 3, 4, 5 houses. Well, the reason they were able to buy those houses is because money was made so available. Credit was cheap, and people could qualify for loans that in a normal situation they couldn't. And then we're told, well, it's part of the business cycle. There is no business cycle. The Federal Reserve, in conjunction with the federal government, creates monetary policy that allows people to get into a tremendous amount of debt when they have a sufficient amount of people in debt to a level that they can't support, they restrict the money supply. They don't issue any new loans so people can restructure the debt they have. And then they get the real hard assets back for pennies on the dollar. Central banking is such an insidious system. They're allowed to create money out of nothing, indebt us to that fiat fake money. But when we can't pay back the loans, we lose real things, real assets back to them. And furthermore, as we are paying the interest on these loans that come out of fake money, we're doing it with real labor, real time away from our families, real time working. We're giving our souls and our lives to gain Federal Reserve notes, to pay interest on loans, on money that really didn't exist until the second that loan came into existence.
It kills me not to know this, but I've all but just forgotten what the color of her